This is a situation that is either going to break us or make us. It's going to permanently alter us in a negative way, or it's going to grow us. And we're going to use this. So we committed, we're going to use this as a growth opportunity.
Hey, welcome to the We Bring Life podcast, where we discuss topics and stories that will bring you life. I am Zach, one of the pastors here at Freshwater. Today I'm joined by Pastor Anna, our pastor of discipleship here at Freshwater, and we have a very special guest with us today. Gina is joining us. She comes all the way from California, the great state, the mountain part.
Yes, that's right.
Not the crazy coast part.
Not the surfing
the city
part.
parts. No. She's the foothills, mountain, pine trees, beautiful area.
That's right.
And so, Gina, we are excited to have you on to kind of just talk through your story and how God has worked in your life.
Yeah, and a lot of what we talk about here at Freshwater is how God's changed your life and the thing that God has done in your life, and we do faith stories. And so we have talked with you this week. I've gotten to know you a little bit and heard a lot about how God has worked in your life. And why don't you tell us just a little bit of the early days with you and Jesus, like when you first came to know Christ, and like what did that look like? What was that conversion experience like for you?
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you asking this great question. You know, raised in the church, I always had a good foundation, very grace-oriented, and I knew that God reigned, and I knew that Jesus loved me. But my teenage years didn't quite reflect that belief. And as I moved into adulthood, I found myself chasing after love. I did not really understand the love that Jesus intended for us to experience in our life. So I was open to the authority, though I wasn't submitting to it well. And so life had taught me some very hard lessons about expectations in love and looking for that to be fulfilled by humans. And so I found myself in my mid-20s, divorced, broken, many failures, just really hurting. And I lost everything that I had perceived to be success. So my marriage was over. I was no longer going to be able to stay in the home that we had bought. I was finishing school and doing well, but now my concentration was thrown off, so my grades were dropping and everything was crazy. And I found myself back at home with my mom in my teenage bedroom, just really crying out to God. And it was in one of those moments that I had my Jesus encounter. And he really came to me and he ministered to my heart, and he taught me that there is no love that can fulfill me outside of his perfect love.
That's good.
He was the best that there was. There is no other love in fulfillment, and that it was unrealistic for me to expect that from a human, that that was too much pressure, and it really started to begin to heal some of the brokenness that I felt. But the next handful of years were a journey of feeling that love. What does that look like? How do I find fulfillment in the love of Jesus when I can't reach out and touch him, when I can't sit down and see him in front of me? So I had to really rethink what love meant to me, for all of us, for that matter. Yeah. So I was finishing school and still not really living my life super committed, kind of doing what I wanted, but having that in my pocket, I guess. And I stumbled upon a church, a local church. Now, for 10 years, I had said that I love Jesus, but I don't like the church. And it was a very humbling experience for me when I realized that to say that I loved Christ and did not love his bride was very wrong and didn't really make any sense. And so I was mentored. I was becoming mentored by a man who was very transparent, who had been through a lot of hardships in his life, and was just ecstatic when he realized that he could partner with God, that he could work in God's kingdom despite what had happened in his past. So that was my first experience with a pastor that was honest, that had lived the worldly life. and rejected it to follow Jesus. So I sat in the back and listened, started to become a little more involved. That was when somebody shared with them that I could sing. So I've been a vocalist since I was a toddler. That's just something that's always been a part of my life. And I'd never used it for Christ before. But in my 10-year field trip, wandering from karaoke bar to karaoke bar, people would often say, you should be on American Idol, or you should be in a band. And I would always say, regardless of the state of my mind at the time, I could never get paid to do that. I could only do it for Jesus, that it was a gift that God had given me, and I would never feel right about capitalizing on it if it wasn't for him. So even then, I was, recognizing where those gifts came from and wanting to give him glory for it. I had no idea what he had planned for me in that time. So I was in the church, and it was important to serve in the church, and they needed a singer, and I love to sing. And so I just started as a vocalist on the worship team. Just kept being myself, asking lots of questions and learning. I was dating somebody I'd known for a long time, but we weren't really friends. In a small town, you kind of know everybody, but you run in different circles. So Donald and I had been in classes together since 7th grade, and our graduating class had like 300 graduates. So we knew everybody. But he had been also in the karaoke bar scene, and that was kind of where my first marriage had fallen apart. And he had witnessed all of that. And so he was aware of what had happened. And we were friends, we were kind of running around and going four-wheeling and the things that we did in our 20s. So we were dating, and he was coming to church, and there was a shift. It was like, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to live my life for it all the way. I had tried to do both. Have the Jesus principles and live the worldly life. And it just hurt me over and over and over again. It was failure and conviction. I never felt satisfied. So I decided, I'm going to do this all the way. And if you want to be with me, you're going to have to get used to church, because that's going to be in it. And we're either going to get married or I'm moving out. So that was kind of where we were at on that. And he had some experience in church. He came from a home that was not founded on Christ, but he had some interactions socially with the church, and so he thought he knew God. So that's kind of his own story. But he was experiencing it right about the same time. So we committed to this church. I was wrapping up my undergrad in secondary education, and I was getting ready to start looking for a job. I was finishing my student teaching. And that was when the lead pastor, my mentor, asked me if I would accept a job as a part-time secretary. So my new husband was like, that's not quite what we've been talking about here. That's probably going to impact our finances a little and our future. And what do you mean we just paid for school and you want to be a secretary? But I just knew that this was the first step that God had for me. And there was no doubt for me. It was just getting him on board because, we're a team. So I said yes. But I didn't stay the part-time secretary very long. I just kind of get involved in things, and Stan was quick to put my skills to use. So I started full-time, and I've been on staff there for over 10 years now.
So tell us a little bit about your role now on staff and what you're doing now for the church.
Cool. So right now, my official title is the Director of Worship and Ministries, which are both ginormous things.
All the ministries. That's a broad umbrella.
Yeah, if we had a hat for each one, my wall would be filled. So I really just try my best to do what I can in each of those capacities. But I lead our band, Hope Rising, and oversee the discipleship process and all of the planning for our worship celebrations on Sunday. So what you see when you walk through the door and what you experience, and the order of our service and all those things. I'm part of all of that. And then with our ministries, I really try to encourage people to use their strengths and find the positions that suit them, how God shaped them, build those ministries up, make sure our leaders have what they need, participate in the ordering of things, and then oversee the placement and the organization and getting people staffed for different spots on Sundays. And I plan all of our events and build the teams to get those going and do a lot of the day-to-day.
You do some filling in for Pastor Stan there too, right? You do some preaching as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. And that started not long after I became on staff. He really believes that we should build up from within the body. And as a teacher, I had some experience in, relaying information and having others understand it and apply it.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of started off with my story with little topical points that would go along with whatever series we were in. And so I don't really have a count now at this point. It's been going on for so long, but I am part of the teaching team
Good.
at Hope. Which I do really love.
Yeah.
I'll have another question if you don't.
I was to get into some of the history in the church of what they've gone through and how that's impacted her.
Sure.
So
Go there.
Yeah. So, speaking of your role at the church, and in the 10 plus years that you've been on staff and no longer as part of the church has gone through a lot. And what I know of Hope Church. So can you kind of go to 2015, 16, 17 to 18, and then the big thing that happened in 2018, but let's to kind of give us some of the history in the church and what you guys have gone through.
Sure. So 2016, 2017, we were kind of reaching our growth, the peak of our growth. We had multiple ministries. We were right about 200, and we were amped up to break through that barrier. So as we start progressing forward, we're seeing just lives changed and growth, and the community is aware of what we're doing, and it's just like God is just doing all these wonderful things. And so we planned a 40 days of prayer campaign. And we really liked to do campaigns in the fall. It was just a good way to get everybody kind of on board, and we'd fill in all these fun different things. I was planning our end of campaign celebration, and that was scheduled for Friday, November 9th. And we had been doing the different weeks of prayer. And so the final week is, what if God doesn't answer our prayer? Like, we want him to, are we going to take our ball and go home, or what are we going to do? Yeah. And so we just taught that on Sunday. I had this whole wall built, all this stuff happened. And then on November 8th, 2018, the campfire came through our community. And it devastated 85% of all of our buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So oh my gosh, that day was very intense.
Yeah.
And so when we reconvened, so this was on a Thursday, somebody reached out to Stan that weekend. We met as a church that Sunday morning at a smaller church in Chico that lent us their building. It was packed, absolutely packed. We had no plans. I sent out a set list. Do you have an instrument? Bring your instrument, right? Worship team. What are we going to do? We don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah.
We're just going to get there and do it. And it was the most impactful worship service I have ever been present in. It was phenomenal. Yeah. And so we praised God for being alive and for being together. Yeah. When asked, did you lose your home? It was an easier question to ask who didn't raise their home, because then you could actually count the hands.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't even know yet. The smoke was still in the air. Yeah. And so over that next year, we met at a church in Chico. We never missed a Sunday that whole time. We just wanted to be together. And we had to start saying goodbye to people. So relocation was inevitable. and it was heartbreaking. I would say one of our biggest ministries was encouraging people that they were taking a piece of hope wherever God planted them,
Yeah.
that they were not abandoning us, that we would always be there. So it was the ministry of encouragement. We saw, the need in the community was just overwhelming. And so everything from gift cards, financial support, trying to find rentals for people, housing, cars.
Yeah.
There was like a whole ministry just in helping people find temporary trailers to live in.
Yeah.
But there was a whole lot of help and resources given and support through that.
Yeah.
So as a church, I'm going to say the next 16 weeks, we're all on God's promises. It was like, we're just going to focus on a different promise. Remember how good God is, what he can do. But we really lived life in that, seek first the kingdom and God will provide what you need. That God is our provider, that he's always taking care of us, because moment by moment, we did not know some days where we would sleep, definitely what we would eat, and literally the clothes on our back.
Yeah.
I mean, we had nothing. And so we watched him provide moment by moment, right when you need it. And we weren't really in a capacity even to be worried about it. We were more thinking, life or death kind of thing. And are our loved ones safe? And that was a very stressful time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to think about, if you know one family that loses their home in a fire,
Yeah.
and just all they go through, like, oh, that's terrible, that's rough. But this was a town of 20,000 people.
Yes.
That 85% of the buildings were wiped out. And I remember a few months after I drove through, and it was just mind-blowing to see the difference in the town. And so that type of displacement and the needs, just overwhelming. And that's where, you and the church stepped so much into that. And really the other side of that pain of losing your community and what you have there, but then the ongoing sense of loss and what you were saying of the people moving away that would move to different families they had, or, different connections around the state and the country, that's just so difficult. Yet hope as a church family stayed strong through that and focused, like you're saying, on the promises of God through that difficult time. And I think that's just so inspiring.
Yeah, it
to
is.
see and to hear of.
Yeah, I'd the story because there's more after that, right? And what I kept hearing is how resilient hope is that there's a resilience in your body and in your leadership.
Absolutely.
To stay there and go through all of the things that you guys have been through, even since, the fire was enough. And then there's been more since then that you guys have gone through. You have a resilient congregation of people that love Jesus and want to spread hope, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Things never really stopped coming at us after that, for everybody. So it's our little area to start. And we're encouraging people and dealing with PTSD and loss. And we still to this day have members who are living in travel trailers. Their homes are not yet finished, or they haven't quite finished, or they moved away and they're so homesick and can't get past it. They're looking to come back, and there's no housing. So there is a lot that goes on through that. But we just kept at it, and we were meeting, and we were growing, and we were watching people move and reestablish somewhere else, and then new people would come in. And so God was still growing us and using us and moving through us. So we decided that it was time to go back to the Ridge. And our land had been devastated. We weren't quite ready to build on it yet. And we'd looked around for different places to lease in the area. And we found an old movie store in Magalia, which is just a little above Paradise.
Yeah.
And so we renovated that movie store. Was it the ideal situation for a church? No. But, we'd all been homeless. So, this sounds good to us. So we moved in and we kind of made it our own.
Yeah.
And our first service there had over 100 people. We were packed in, and we were like, yes, this is such a great start, right? That was February 2020. So, a month, 6 weeks later, it's like full shutdown.
Yeah.
Now, we are in a very small community in Northern California. And so what is reflected in the larger cities of California does not always go well for us smaller towns, but that doesn't make the rules any less different for us. And so it was a fun game of figuring out how and what and why. But even through that time, we never missed a Sunday. And so we would gather on Zoom, and we would, at one point, it was Easter, was our first Zoom. I had myself in my one-bedroom apartment where we were temporarily assigned while our house was being built at my keyboard with my laptop. And I had a guitarist in his home with his phone, I believe, videoed, zoomed in, and another brother and sister team, an acoustic guitar and vocalist in Magalia in their situation. And so it was like one at a time, nobody talk at the same time because Zoom can't handle it. And so Stan's at home, in his, swim shorts or his gym shorts with his button-up shirt on top, hiding out. And we just made it work, and you could see people coming in online, and so our tech guy who was overseeing all of that was in Oroville, and so we were just all over the place.
Oh my goodness.
So we eventually changed to where the band was back in the building on Sunday, and people would come in on Zoom. We did a little outside, we did a little inside, but like everybody else, our numbers in person had essentially plummeted. So we went through a lot of ups and downs after that, just asking God, like, are you done with us? Are we still going? What are we doing? And so we just kept at it. Things started to come back and grow again. And then they sold the building we were leasing. And so we had expected to stay there a little longer, and we ended up relocating to our property. Now, Paradise, before the fire, when we had lots of trees, there was lots of shade and a good barrier from the wind. But those trees don't really exist anymore. So we're learning the climate. It is a whole new thing for us. What plants can you have? Where do you position it? Like, what do you do with 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts? Wow. So we met outside on our land. This is the resiliency of our family. We met outside in the shade of a couple of trees that didn't burn. We were propped up on the retaining wall that just happens to be like the septic system. That's where we put the band. Faced out towards the street. But we chose to see the bright side of things. So the neighbors were coming out on their porch during our worship celebration, and they were listening to the sermon and singing along with the music, and we kept going. So then we decided maybe we should upgrade the outdoor situation. And so everybody pitched in, and we bought an event tent. So we put down used AstroTurf that I ordered from like an old soccer field. So the one thing about all this situation is I have learned things I don't really ever need to know. But I'm proficient in them now. And so I'm like, maybe one day that will help someone else.
Someone else needs to get some used AstroTurf. We got a connection for you.
Not only that, but laying used AstroTurf. It's filled, it has a rubber infill, and it weighs like thousands of pounds.
Oh, wow.
She knows a lot about AstroTurf.
How do you move that? I have also learned a lot about equipment. Thankfully, Donald can operate heavy equipment, so we have some very capable members in our body. But we learned how to lay AstroTurf. We learned how to put up a big old tent and how to run a service fully on generator. And we're a full band. So we're running subs and amps and, full drum kit. We set up the full drum kit every Sunday and tore it down every Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And it is just a volunteer culture. Everybody pitches in. How can we help? Then the wind had other plans for our tent right after Christmas. So we relocated to the junior high cafeteria.
Nice.
Which is an interesting smell for a church service. We were grateful for the space, yes. And now we are recreating a whole new plan for setup and tear down. So our motto is fast, fluid, and flexible. And that is a requirement for all of us.
Yeah.
But we're still at it. And
Yeah.
currently we are in an older church building that was left after the fire. It needs a lot of work. It's not ours, so we're just kind of temporarily there while we wait for our building plans to be solidified and to break ground.
Yeah.
So we're still in anticipation for what is to come.
Yep. And just all of the construction stuff since the fire has just been nuts with all the rebuilding. And so I know it's been a lot of delays in the process for you guys, but we're hoping and praying that you can break ground soon on that and get all the permits and stuff. But
Yeah.
I think just hearing that story, it's so appropriate that the church is named Hope.
Yes.
Because it is a picture of resilience, like you're saying, and going through these difficult things of like, that's what hope is and what hope gives us. And it sustains us through the ups and downs and the uncertainty and the frustrations of life. And I think Hope Church has been a beautiful picture
Yeah.
of hope lived
Yeah.
out in a believer's
Thank
life.
you. Yeah.
And you've been at the forefront of leading that and responding to those different situations.
So we've gone through a lot of the stuff that the church has been through and a lot of your story. And so if you look back at like where we started with what Gina was at in her early 20s and teenager-ish, and where you are at now, like would you ever think that this is what you would be doing? And why would you think that? Why would you
Yeah.
would or not think that? Like
Yeah.
kind of like
Wow. Goodness, absolutely not in a million years could I have ever imagined that this is what God had planned for my life. I really, I don't know that I believed that I was capable of it or that I was worth it. I'd made decisions that in my mind disqualified me from certain things in the church. So boy, was I wrong about that. You know, God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And that is something I have learned firsthand. So no, I mean, 20-year-old Gina would have laughed in her face. Yeah, right. So, you know, over that process and moving through it, I feel like I had to learn some hard lessons, especially as a woman in leadership. How people respond to that, to learn what a servant leader really is and how to love through all of that, what the ultimate goal is, where authority comes from, who has the ultimate authority,
Yeah.
that we're all servants in the kingdom. So it's not about a title or a position,
Yeah.
and learning to love myself, really. Forgiveness towards others is something I think we teach a lot. But forgiveness of ourselves is something that some of us really get hung up on. And though we know that God has forgiven us of those past things, sometimes we still hold those things against us.
Yeah.
And so that kind of defined the first few years of my ministry where I felt disqualified.
Yeah.
But God kept making it very clear that there was another step and there was another step. And so I would say it's been a good number of years now where I just say, you know, Lord, what you put in front of me is the task for today. I try not to question too much the why and just trust in the process. But each of those things had a learning experience. I will say that I had experienced rejection and loss and difficulty in my younger years that developed and refined me and prepared my heart for Jesus and what he wanted to do in my life. But the trauma of the fire and experiencing that with the community, that was a refinement I wasn't expecting. Before the fire, I was like crying out, don't leave me this way, help me grow. I didn't want to be stagnant. I was looking for change. That was not exactly the answer to it I was expecting.
That's for this guy.
Right. And we've had many of those conversations. But looking back on it now, I would not trade it for anything. It was so valuable. And as a couple, Donald and I decided early on, this is a situation that is either going to break us or make us. It's going to permanently alter us in a negative way, or it's going to grow us. And we're going to use this. So we committed, we're going to use this as a growth opportunity. And simultaneously, Stan is deciding the same thing. So we put that into our model for the church after that. And every interview from a news station, every opportunity we had, that is what we did. We spoke hope, we spoke Jesus, we spoke restoration, and just knowing that all of the good that can come from these really difficult and challenging times. I look back now, and while there are many things different of me, I have different principles and discipline. I am still very much Gina. And so I really kind of speak to this intentional creation. I think that sometimes we want to be different. We can live in a culture that kind of tells us we should be this or we should be like that. And we should just embrace the uniqueness to which God creates us and use that in whatever situation it is. And because we did that, I think that really helped our people. It helped us survive it. You know, God doesn't waste a hurt. Everything will be used. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that for me, listening to you and talking to you this week is knowing how supportive Pastor Stan has been with you too. And we haven't mentioned this, but Pastor Stan is Zach's dad, which we're hoping that everybody knows that Stan's Pastor Zach's dad, and we're just assuming that here. So I'm just going to put that out there. Stan the man, and Stan is an encouraging man. I've been encouraged by his ministry through Zach and the things that his Stanisms, his little things that he says that I've learned are Stanisms now. But knowing that you've been encouraged as a woman and discipled by him has been really encouraging to me, because I think we share a lot of the similarities in how God's called us and how God's brought us into ministry with men who have supported and encouraged all along the way. And that's just really neat for me to see, is like as you were presented opportunities that God gave you, that you walk through and you were obedient to those things. And so that's really cool to see. And so I just want to make sure we knew it was Pastor Stan too.
Yes, absolutely. Stan has been a huge encouragement in my ministry and in my life and in my walk. And he's never treated me like I didn't belong. You know, he calls me daughter, which means a lot to me. And that we're family, and he's so excited that I'm out here spending time with you guys. But he's been a huge encouragement. And I know that some of his beliefs and convictions have changed as God has brought me to him as a disciple. But he never shunned me away from learning. He always embraced my questions and my unique shape. He didn't rebuke me for being different, because him and I are very different. And God's used that actually to bless us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, well, we appreciate you being with us on this podcast and sharing about your story and how God has worked in your life. Gina,
thanks for
closing
having me.
thoughts or anything before we wrap up? I think you covered it well.
I think we did cover a lot. So I just... I stand firm, and it is sometimes in the hardest things that we go through in our life that God, he gives the most growth, and he blesses them so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on, and thank you all for joining us for the We Bring Life podcast. We'll catch you next time.